All right, today, Reagan. If we can finish up Reagan, then we'll be done. And I think we can finish up pretty handily in one class period. All right, for Reagan, if you want the outline ahead of time, I've got it in 4 points. The Reagan Revolution is the first point, then the economy, then the Reagan Doctrine, that was his approach to the Cold War, and then we'll talk about his second term. The second term is where we'll get the Iran-Contra affair and several things happening there. So the first 3 points mostly are his first term as president, but some bleed over. All right, the Reagan Revolution. All right, I have it stated this way: there was a clear change of direction in America when Reagan became president. All right, we'd been wallowing with all these liberal and Nixon, Carter, just wallowing around. And on top of that, the civil rights protesting in Vietnam, and just economic chaos. You mentioned briefly the unemployment and inflation being up in 12-13% range. We were going in very much the wrong direction. And when Reagan came in, we have that changing. This is a quote from, it might be in your book, but it's a quote from Reagan. A revolution of ideas became a revolution of governance on January the 20th, 1981. That's the day he took office. That's the day who was telling me about the hostages being released after class? That basically said Reagan isn't Carter. We're not going to mess with him. Release the hostages. So anyway, this change is referred to as the Reagan Revolution. It was a completely different change. To me, I think a good analogy is prior to Reagan, we were stuck inside the 7th and 8th grade classroom upstairs without ventilation on a hot day. And Reagan was opening the windows and the doors and turning on the air conditioning, letting fresh air, and it was that breath of life. It was anyway, Reagan Revolution. If you've ever walked into their classroom, I've really enjoyed the 9th and 10th graders. I usually come in after them to pre-cal, but they've been doing dissecting. So I walk into a room that is not stinky anymore because they've been down here cutting out sheep parts. So, all right, Reagan Revolution. Let me give you just generally two broad points that Reagan pushed here in this revolution. These are very broad, but two basic thoughts. If you had to say what's this Reagan Revolution? Two things. One, he wanted America to be strong. America must be strong. That obviously we see that in his confrontation with the Soviet Union, military buildup, but strength. For a government class, we're having some extra time in there. And one of the lectures, Jacob, we're going to talk about foreign policy. And a strong military is a very useful thing to have when you're negotiating with other countries. If you have nothing to back up your discussions, then you're really in a bad position. So anyway, strong. America must be strong. And we're going to see Reagan pushing all kinds of things with that. The second one is America must be free. This will be more of a domestic issue. Economic freedom, getting rid of government regulation, lowering taxes. America must be free. And we're going to see the economy unleashed here and produce an amazing amount of jobs and wealth that really just keeps plowing on into the 90s. It took a decade or so of liberal policies to bring about the crash in 2008 to end that economic run, really. So the Reagan Revolution, him coming to office was a complete change of everything. So one other thing to mention here, really just to fit it in someplace, is shortly after Reagan took office, there was a serious assassination attempt made on him. March the 30th, 1981. It sounds kind of repetitive to say some crazy man shot the president, but that's, whenever we talk about shooting the president, usually crazy man goes in front of that. So we have a crazy man here shooting the president. 69 days into his term, John Hinckley Jr. He didn't succeed here because he's not known by all three names. That's why. I'm completely joking about that, but John Hinckley Jr. is his name. If you think of, I just lost all the names. John Wilkes Booth, Kennedy's, Lee Harvey Oswald, it's all three names somehow. So his middle name gets dropped. He was a crazy man. I mean, he had mental problems, had these voices talking to him. He was stalking some girl that had been in a movie. He had crazy problems, and he thought shooting the president would make this girl like him. Would that be somehow positive, girls? I'll leave that alone. there you go, guys. You know how to get into our good graces.
I read about Reagan's pretty amazing reaction to this.
It's a great story.
Instead of hating a guy, he prayed for him.
Mm-hmm. Reagan really saw this as him surviving, as God sparing him for some great task. I mean, that was it was a changing moment in his life. He got shot in his chest. The bullet stopped about an inch from his heart. It was a I've not looked into it too much, but it was a .22 revolver, but a Devastator bullet that had some sort of explosive in it, and it hit the window and deflected, and that hitting the window destroyed the explosive mechanism, so it didn't actually explode. It became a projectile at that point. The one that hit James Brady in the head exploded. If you ever heard of the Brady Bill, is named after that guy. That one actually did. But anyway, if the thing had actually exploded, that would have been a different story, an inch from the president's heart. So there's so many good stories about that. There's a very good book called Rawhide Down. When you have nothing else important to do, read that book.
Those bullets were so volatile when the FBI was testing them after the shooting. They literally were blowing up in people's faces that were testing them. They not only did they have explosives, like it had poison or something like that, like venom or something.
I don't know.
Some kind of way crazy bullets.
I've always assumed that it can only be used in a revolver. I imagine a semi-automatic mechanism might be a little bit dangerous, but I don't know. So anyway, the president was walking out of a hotel from giving a speech, and there's a crowd there, and he just walked out and started shooting. The Secret Service did their job, protected him. They took the president, slammed him into the car, and jumped on top of him, closed the door. He hadn't really even realized he'd been shot at that point, but then they start seeing blood, and he's having trouble breathing, and they take him to the hospital. Imagine that being your shift at the hospital. You know? The president shows up. It was interesting reading Rawhide Down. I guess they have this protocol that whenever a high-name person comes in, that they follow the standard protocols. They don't all of a sudden want to get creative and, let's try something different. Standard protocols, whatever they would typically do, they do to him. So they find a bullet and they do the operation. And the nurse that came for the night shift just came for a regular night. And I don't know, you can imagine walking, all right, tonight, you get the president. He got shot in the chest, good luck. But anyway, it dawned on her that nobody ever explained to the president what really happened. He gets shot, he's having trouble breathing, they rush him to the hospital, they put him under, he wakes up and he's got tubes down his throat, and, he doesn't know what's going on, so she explains it to him. And then she just sits and holds his hand and talks to him, and at one point he writes her a note, does Nancy know about us? Him and this other woman meeting in the middle of the night. There's a lot of great stories. Reagan's wit comes out. Do you remember the phrase he used when he's first brought into the hospital and all the doctors are looking at him? Please tell me you're Republicans. Or he told his wife, honey, I forgot the duck.
Also, when Mike Reagan went to see him, Reagan said, if you're going to get shot, don't wear a new suit.
Yes. So, anyway, Reagan was known for that kind of wit, and it comes out here. But anyway, it really was a very near thing for him to get shot. And I mean, he did get shot, but he nearly died as well. So anyway, that assassination was March the 30th. He had taken office on January the 20th, so this was very early in. And he really did see this as God protecting him for some greater task. All right, Reagan Revolution. Second point is the economy. That book, Rawhide Down, is really good. You've read it? Or listened to it, read it? You have read it. Is that somehow more substantial than listening? I don't know. Okay, I listen to it. I listen to more books than I read more nowadays, but I do like reading. All right, the economy. Sorry, no bullets here to talk about, just depressing stats. Okay. First point is that the economy was a mess when Reagan came to office. if you want a more substantial statement, when Reagan became president, America's economy was in a terrible condition. It was a mess. It had a condition that, according to Keynesian economics, was not possible. No, liberal economists, they don't ever get to the conclusion of, well, maybe our theory is flawed. That's not ever the answer. But really a strange condition if you take their premise. And I'll try to explain it without a whole lot of details. If you don't understand the details or the explanation, at least get this point. By a terrible condition or big mess, I mean this, very high inflation, or at least high inflation by our standards, double digit. If you want some actual numbers, 79 was 11.22. 80, the year he took office, was 13.58. The next year was 10.35. So what that means in practice, if you were buying something that was $100 in 78, in 79 it's $111. In 80 it goes up another almost 14%, so whatever, the $125, $26. And then 81 goes up another 10%. So we're up to 143 or something like that. The price is going up. That's what we mean by inflation. So high, double-digit, high inflation historically for us. We generally have 2 or 3% inflation. That's seen, like this under control type thing, which is another thing. So inflation, high inflation. The second thing was high unemployment. High unemployment. Or I guess I should say moderately high. I should read the whole statement. Moderately high. It was not 30%, 8, 9%, fluctuate in that range. 7, 8, 9%, I guess I should say. Moderately high unemployment. According to liberal economic policy, this is not possible, because they would say the high inflation is caused by too much demand. There's too many people working, there's too much money in circulation, there's too many people wanting to buy products, and that's pushing up prices. So according to their thinking, you should never have high inflation and high unemployment at the same time. If you had high unemployment, that would mean, well, there's not as much demand, there's a whole lot of people not buying products, so prices are going to come down. So this was really put them in a quandary. They did have things based on their theory that addresses the high inflation or addresses the high unemployment, but they really didn't have anything that did both. If they tried to figure out the high inflation, they were going to create unemployment more. If they tried to handle the unemployment situation, they were going to cause inflation to go up. So this put liberal economists in a tizzy, because they didn't know how to address this thing. That general condition is called stagflation. We have inflation and those type of things. Stagflation, we have this high inflation, high unemployment. And it really, according to the Keynesian model of economics, they didn't know where to turn for this, because anything that they did according to that idea would further aggravate the problem. So, all right, so terrible condition. Let me read you a quote from Reagan during the campaign that is a famous one. He has a lot of famous quotes. All right, this was in a debate between him and Carter. I think it was a debate, but he was talking to Carter. He said, I am talking in human terms, and he's hiding behind a dictionary. They were talking about whether or not the economy was in a depression or recession and that type of thing. And he said, he wants to go to some technical definition. I'm talking in human terms, he's hiding behind a dictionary. If he wants a definition, I'll give him one. A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. A recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his. But anyway, the economy was a mess, and Carter was trying to say, oh no, it's not that bad, and he would go to some stats and say, well, it's not really a depression, it's just a recession, and Reagan said, who cares about all the technicalities? It's a mess, and the solution is get Carter out of there. So, all right, so terrible condition in the economy. All right, the next thing, and really the only other thing here with the economy, is Reagan's approach to it. Reagan's approach to it gets called all kinds of names. Reaganomics is called supply-side economics. That's more of a technical term referring to the economic approach. It's called voodoo economics, like it's some witch doctor thing. Obviously, that was a name made by liberals. It's called trickle-down economics. Supposedly, according to the liberals, he was going to make the rich really wealthy, and that would kind of trickle down to everybody else somehow, it was trying to make fun of it. It's called all kinds of things. Reaganomics, supply side economics. Supply side really addresses the economics approach to the thing. But his plan. All right, let me give you a general thought that he wanted to accomplish. Then we'll look at the two basic things that he did to get there. His basic thought was to increase the productivity of America. Wanted to get America working, release the shackles off of businesses and employers and let them hire people and make products, make America more productive. Now again here, if I lose you on the economics, if we have high inflation and businesses begin producing more items, that's going to tend to draw prices down. Right? Imagine that, I don't know, Lawrence has a corner. Do you guys still have somebody in the dorm that sells cans of pop?
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work? Nobody buys them? Good. These guys aren't as stupid as they were when I was in there. Nobody sells pop? Sometimes, or? Okay.
Over $80 for the bottle.
Okay, so there's a lot of stupid guys still. I used to laugh. I don't know if this isn't generally true, but a lot of times the guys who are always buying pop never paid their school bill and other things too, but it's okay. But you'll take the money. He's selling pop in the dorm. Right now we have just that small supply. What Reagan wanted to do was get more producers, have other guys, make it easier for other people to sell pop in the dorm. And all of a sudden if he's got competition, that's going to bring the price down. Does that make sense? And so generally as a whole, he's wanting to increase the productivity of America so that there's more people making cans of pop, more people making cars, more people making whatever product you want to think of, and that increase in the supply, that's where the supply side term comes from, and that increase in the supply is going to bring down inflation. Okay? To get the increase in supply is going to also require more workers. What will that do to the unemployment rate? It'll pull that down as well. Right? So he was really just wanting to turn the economy loose, and allowing businesses to produce more is going to both bring down the inflation rate and bring down the unemployment rate. So liberals' thinking was we got to somehow spend government money and borrow money and all that kind of thing, and they couldn't figure out how to attack both. Really here, just economic freedom addresses the whole thing. So he wanted to increase the productivity of America. That's just a general description. The two ways he went about that, two basic pieces of his plan, was cut taxes. All right, eventually there's a law that makes it through Congress, the Economic Recovery Act of 1981. The liberals in Congress agreed to this with their arms twisted behind their back. Reagan was very good at taking his ideas and explaining to the people of America why his ideas were better. And then they put lots of pressure on Congress to say, we like Reagan's idea. and Congress would go along with it. So he was very good he was called the great communicator because he was so good at communicating, not just talking to people in Congress, but talking to the people as a whole. So anyway, he's able to win this argument, push pressure on Congress, and they passed this Economic Recovery Act of 81. If you want some particulars in it, a general thing is it cut income taxes by 25%. That's kind of a general average. You have with our graduated income tax, which is a stupid way to tax, but with our graduated income tax, we have a couple different taxing categories, and some of them move more, some of them move less, but just kind of a general summary was about a 25% cut. If you want one in particular, these numbers are still amazing to me. The upper level was, before this, 70%. So if you made enough money, let's just say that upper level started at $300,000 a year, everything above $300,000, if you made $400,000, that last $100,000 you had to give $70,000 of it to the government. And if that seems perfectly reasonable to you, then we're in trouble. Okay, that rate went from 70 to 50, which is still outrageous. All right, but significantly better. All right, so income taxes were cut. I guess this is what I should put here. It was not part of that that particular act, but business taxes were also cut. The taxes that a corporation have to pay, sole proprietorship, just business taxes also cut. That was to free up money so these businesses could have the capital and the resources to begin this massive increase in production. All right, the other thing that he did, we have him cutting taxes. The second thing is cutting government regulation. Cut taxes, cut regulation. Pulled all kinds of restrictions on companies and work requirements and OSHA requirements. And anybody ever worked someplace where you had to dance around all kinds of OSHA rules? Anybody work someplace where you have to have MSDSs posted, material safety data sheets? You know, you have kitchen soap that you wash dishes with, and you've got to have the MSDS available for all the workers to know that it's kitchen soap. You shouldn't eat it. You shouldn't. But all that is government regulation. And I'm not saying that particular one he got rid of, but that type of thing. He starts pulling these things off. Liberals talk about, oh, he deregulated the economy, and look at the problems it created. It freed us up, right? Imagine, I don't know, to me, sports is a good place to make analogies with economics. Imagine trying to play basketball with the ref periodically just making extra rules. You know? All right, now you have to only dribble with your weak hand. Right? But only you, the other side doesn't do it, just you. You see, it's both. You can't. Thomas would come over that one. All right, you can't take more than one shot per trip down the court. You get one shot, and then you have to go back and play defense and get the ball. And that would be somewhat described as earning opportunities to score as opposed to stealing them by getting a rebound or something like, they would make it sound good. But having all those regulations and then somebody step in and say, wait a second, this isn't basketball. Get rid of these stupid rules and let the guys play. And that's kind of what Reagan did here. Pulled all those regulations off and let the economy go. Now we still, even here, we still had way too much of this type of regulation, but he pulled off some of those shackles. So cut taxes, cut regulation.
Keeps going, you regulate it, and then if it stops working, you subsidize it.
Yeah, did you catch that? If there's a business that's growing, you tax it. If it starts growing too fast, then you regulate it. And if you kill it, then you subsidize it to keep it alive, to save the jobs. Never be a liberal. It hurts your mind to try to follow the logic. There's no logic, so it's very hard to follow. All right, so Reaganomics, his approach to the economy, and that turned the economy around. It took a couple years. There were some very dark times there in 82 and into 83 where he'd cut this tax cut and all those other things, and the result wasn't there. He wasn't starting to see the fruit of it. By the time he hits his second election, he wins in a landslide. Completely ugly win, but completely ugly loss for the other guy. But we'll get there in a second. All right, the other thing to talk about here, we have the economy, we have the Reagan Revolution, the economy, and then the Reagan Doctrine, his approach to the Cold War. All right, we've talked about the Cold War already. We've talked about the three phases, the only play defense phase, the pretend like we're not at war phase, détente, and then Reagan was, let's imagine there's no Soviet Union phase. let's win this thing. All right, his phrase was, we win, they lose, which you heard in Reagan in his own voice tapes. All right, so the Reagan Doctrine, let me give you a brief statement of it if we need it. He promised to send support to any insurgent groups battling communism in the Third World. Now, more than just this token thing, we want to support them. He was very aggressive about helping any group around the world that was fighting communism. I mean, he sent money and troops, and not troops so much, money, supplies, weapons, ammunition, all over the place, and put major pressure on the Soviet Union. All right, it takes several years for that to fully come to fruition, but that's what it is. So the Reagan Doctrine. Now I'll give you some examples of places where he does this. In Central America, there was a couple. In 1981, there was a group of people in Central America, in El Salvador, fighting against the communist takeover there. Excuse me. The particular group that he was supporting was called the Contras. and they were fighting against a group called the Sandinistas. So we have this conflict there. So anyway, he began to help the Contras there in El Salvador resisting against communism. The Democrats in Congress began to resist this. All right, they began passing laws and things, making it difficult for Reagan to send them supplies and equipment and things like that. Eventually, we get the Iran-Contra affair. That doesn't come until his next term. In the next term, we have both sides of Congress controlled by the Democrats. So they're able to do a whole lot more to meddle with him. But they began to get in the way. Hopefully you're thinking, why would the Democrats in Congress meddle with him, preventing communism from spreading? And that's a valid question, and I don't know any sane answer. Other than maybe they agreed with the Sandinista, the communists, more than they did the Contras. But anyway, they began to put roadblocks in there and tried to prevent him from helping them. But that was one place. In '83, he goes into Grenada. Where the government was taken over by a radical communist group, and he sends the Marines in, literally, and takes over the island. That was one of those decisions where, his aides come to him and say, hey, this just happened. There were a bunch of American medical students there. And he says, well, let's invade. It was a decision made in a short amount of time. So that was in Central America. Angola, I have similar type stuff there. In Angola, there were communist forces, mostly supported by Cuba, some of them actual Cuban troops in Angola there, trying to create a communist state. And we began to support those opposing them in Angola. Eventually in '88, those outside forces began to pull out and give up on that fight. But that was Angola. Another place is Afghanistan. Starting in '79, the Soviets began invading Afghanistan, just a direct invasion of Afghanistan. And we began to help the people rebelling against that. Anybody know who those people were? Couple? The Taliban. Right? It was Muslims in Afghanistan fighting against the Soviets. So if you ever hear someone say, oh yeah, bin Laden and all those people, we created the problem, and they're really CIA agents or something like that. There's just a grain of truth to that, because we really did give them weapons to fight the Soviet Union. They never bring that up, that we were fighting the Soviet Union at that point, but it was the Muslims, the Taliban, and groups like that. Yeah. Oh, so anyway, that was '79 that invasion begins, and we begin helping the other side. Eventually, in '89, the Soviets pull out. A complete disgrace for them. They were never able to get it done. They fight a very nasty, ugly war. Eventually, as they don't succeed initially, they start leaving booby traps and toys that had bombs triggered to them and things like that. Just very ugly. Not that wars ever not ugly, but just targeting children and things like that. But anyway, that was Afghanistan. We supply the Muslims there fighting against the Soviets. All right, so the Reagan Doctrine put pressure on the Soviets. Anywhere this stuff came up, not just some token pressure, we're going to actively and aggressively supply the other side and try to turn the tide there. All right, let's talk about the second term. The second term. First thing is the election, and Reagan crushes Walter Mondale. Crushes Walter Mondale. Reagan won every state except for one state in the District of Columbia. Mondale won his home state of Minnesota, and he won the District of Columbia. I think we talked about D.C. before with their mayor. The guy caught with a prostitute and marijuana gets reelected. So, that's not a real high mark to say he won D.C. And he won Minnesota. That was it. Reagan won every other state. All right, so this is a landslide. It was not even close. Which really is for a couple years there, his aides were saying, you're through. I mean, his economic policy wasn't really working yet. The Reagan Doctrine, the fruit wasn't there yet. There was some real pressure on him to do some things to try to make himself look better for the election. And he said, no, this is going to work. And it did for him. So he wins handily. At the same time as he wins, we have the Senate being taken over by the Democrats. Prior to this, the House was controlled by the Democrats and the Senate by Republicans. Now we have the Democrats controlling both sides of Congress. Question? Okay, so we have a completely Democratic Congress now, and that leads to some problems. The major one is the Iran-Contra affair, where they pass some very stupid rules, and Reagan tries to work around them, and just some stupidity. All right, that was the election. All right, I'm going to look at two other things here in the second term. One is the Cold War, and then we'll talk about that Iran-Contra affair briefly. All right, Reagan here, I have a word of the Cold War thaw, but basically we melt down the Soviet Union and win this thing. So Reagan never met with any of the Soviet leaders until 85. He joked that they kept dying before he had a chance to meet with them. Brezhnev died in 82, Andropov came in 85, and then Chernenko also came in 85, and he died. And then Gorbachev comes in in 85, and he's there for long enough for Reagan to meet with him. So for several years there's those other, the Brezhnev and Andropov, those guys were very old guys that dated back to the Stalin era. I mean, these are dinosaurs. Gorbachev was young. He came of age and entered politics after Stalin was gone, and that whole era was gone. So it was very, very different type creature as far as the type of leader he was. But he comes in 85, and Reagan eventually meets with him several times. So let's talk about those meetings a little bit, and then we'll talk about some things that Gorbachev does. So, all right, Reagan eventually meets with Gorbachev 5 different times. And out of this, there are some treaties and things that are produced. Do not think here that Reagan caves in. Right? Other presidents would cave in and give up all kinds of crazy stuff for them to, like Kennedy after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He gave up missiles we had in place in Turkey for missiles that the Soviets hadn't managed to be able to build yet in Cuba. He gave up something real for something that didn't even exist yet. All right, so not that type of deal. I mean, some real legitimate treaties. So we do have a couple of these treaties. Let me give you 2 examples. Strategic arms reduction talks, START. Strategic arms reduction talks that dealt with long-range nuclear missiles. And then the other example here is the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, INF. Can anybody guess what range nuclear missiles this dealt with? Going to go with intermediate? Oh, it's called the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. So this is intermediate, not long range, intermediate. So different types of missiles, basically. And it restricted those, both sides agreeing to cut back on different things like that. So we do have some meetings, and he produces, there's some of these type of treaties that come out of them. So, however, he did not cave in. All right? He did not let the Soviets manipulate him. He didn't, I keep referring to them selling the Soviets grain below market cost and things like that. I mean, he did not do stuff like that, even to the point of just walking away and not getting an agreement. All right? The most famous example of that was at Reykjavik in October of 86. If you want to spell in Reykjavik, Reykjavik, Iceland. Him and Gorbachev met there, and Gorbachev said we'll give up all this kind of stuff if Reagan would give up his Strategic Defensive Initiative, SDI, this Star Wars program of being able to blow up Soviet missiles in space and all that kind of stuff. And Reagan just walked away and says, well, forget it. We're not giving that up. It was a defensive system to knock down Soviet missiles. It was, at that point, only a dream. And the technology didn't exist yet, but it was a dream that they were pushing for. And Reagan walks away rather than get some agreement. And there was pressure there to, we gotta compromise. We don't want to have the world blow up. And when he walks away from this, we have the whole peace movement saying, oh, we're going to have war next week. All these crazy things about this cowboy taking over the world and blowing the world up. All those crazy things, but he did not back down. I think I mentioned to you Operation Solo. I just lost the guy's name. Anyway, Reagan didn't know the guy personally, but he got information from him. He knew, Reagan, when he went into Reykjavik, knew that the one thing the Soviets feared the most was Star Wars. They knew that they couldn't match that. And they're thinking, if they had a missile defense shield that could shoot down all of our missiles, they're launching. There's no more America. So they're thinking, if we don't stop this, they're just going to launch their missiles and kill us. So Reagan knew that was the one thing that they were petrified of. And when Gorbachev said, I want you to give up SDI, Reagan says, no. The one thing they really wanted, and he walks away from it. So anyway, Reagan does not cave in. He meets with them several times, but holds his ground. And really what he does is he pushes the Soviets over the edge. He doesn't bail them out with grain or cheap loans, forces them to spend tons of money keeping up with his arms build-up, and then this nuclear defense shield, Star Wars, it was a name given to mock it by liberals. And the Soviets couldn't keep on. Really, what he did is he pushed them over the edge. They got to the point where they could not maintain. It's be like trying to run a sprint. At a certain point, you give up and you fall off to the side. You can't just do it forever. And he knew that America was in a much better position to run the sprint for a much longer time. So he just kept running the sprint. And at a certain point, they fell over and died. He just kept pushing. So he did not cave in there. Just kept driving and driving and driving. We're going to watch a video that the film we're going to watch about Reagan goes into some of the detail about how he pushes them over the edge. But he did not give up, did not give them any breathing room, did not back off of things like the SDI or building up our military forces and things like that. Just kept driving, as well as making agreements with the OPEC nations to increase the production of oil and natural gas. So we get all kinds of cheap fuel, and the Soviets, who were selling natural gas at that point, are selling all kinds of natural gas, but at lower prices. So he's knocking the knees out of their ability to make money, and at the same time causing them to spend all kinds of money. So he's, any way he could, he was hammering at them, and he did not, in these agreements here, back out of these things, held his line. So, all right, so he meets with them 5 times, does not back down. All right, let's talk a little bit about Gorbachev. He makes some changes in the Soviet Union, mostly in response to Gorbachev. Or Reagan. Reagan's got him in this box and not letting him out. He's not going to give him some easy way out of this economic disaster that communism and socialism always creates. He's not going to give them a way to keep that thing afloat. And Gorbachev makes a couple of changes here, trying to tinker with the Soviet system to keep it alive. You going to give me the changes? Yeah, you said them a little better than I do. Glasnost, Glasnost, means openness. Is that okay? Free speech? Okay, I just have openness is what it means, but that type of, instead of a repressive society, openness. It removes some of the controls, the government controls on speech and newspapers and things like that. And then perestroika, and I didn't have all the accents right in there. If you want to spell for that, Perestroika. A little slower. Perestroika. And have that means basically restructuring. Is that a good enough definition?
Change with the police forces and make them freer.
And I've restructured mostly the economy, allowing a little bit of economic freedom, the free market in, that type of thing. So restructuring. I have restructuring the economy, and then he allowed some free market things in. So
basically what destroyed the Soviet Union, because like open the small hole in the wall, we just kind of slam a hammer through and check it.
Yeah, it really did. It'd be like going to a gigantic dam and just drilling a few holes through it to let the pressure out or something. It started a flood of events that he could not stop. I mean, he was thinking to incorporate enough of freedom and the system that made America so great, just add a little bit of that to the Soviet system because they were going to starve to death if they didn't. And it started a chain of events that he could not control, got completely out of his hands. Now, some people say, "Oh, look at Gorbachev, ends the Soviet Union." But don't forget who put him in that position. He would not have done this if we had bailed them out and sold them food and given them loans really cheap and things like that to keep themselves afloat. We pushed them over the edge. So don't forget that Reagan is the one that put him in a position to try to implement these programs. So anyway, implements these programs, and I have a word, these two policies open the floodgates to much more than Gorbachev could have hoped for or dreamed of. It unleashed events that he could not stop in time. All right, now the Soviet Union does not collapse until after Reagan leaves office, but it'd be like this. It'd be like me going up to the roof here and throwing somebody off and saying, I wasn't there when he hit the ground, it's not my fault. Reagan threw them off, and when they hit the ground, yes, he was not there, but he's the one that threw them off the building. And even I think it's the Abeka textbook tries to make that distinction, but he was a really good president, but the Soviet Union didn't collapse till after he left office, so maybe not as good as we think. That really is missing the whole boat, okay? It was him. He pushed them over the edge. So. Okay, so the Cold War, he does not back down, continues to drive them into the ground. He wanted to actually have no Soviet Union. That's what he wanted. Looks like I have no question.
A little tidbit. Estonia was actually the nation that destroyed the Soviet Union. They were the first nation to break free from the Soviet Union.
Oh.
They were the ones that collapsed the whole time.
Okay, they got the ball rolling. I didn't realize which country was from.
Single shot being fired. All through singing.
They must sing like I do. If they sing like I do, it's very bloody, but no bullets. So. Okay, Cold War. Last thing is the Iran-Contra affair. All right, this is, and there's no way around it. It looks kind of ugly what Reagan does here. But remember, he is trying, this comes out of Iran and the Contras in El Salvador. The Contras are the freedom fighters. He's trying to get money and equipment to so they can effectively fight communism. And Congress comes in and tries to put some restrictions on that. They pass some laws and different things saying, the one particular one, if you want it, is the Boland Amendment, which just said that money cannot be given directly to the Contras, money or equipment or anything. Couldn't give it to them directly. So Reagan was forced to use this kind of circuitous route to try to get money and equipment to them. And that's where Iran comes in, and that's in that route. So there's no way around it. It does look very ugly here what Reagan does. But he's trying to get money and equipment to people fighting communism. And it's our own Congress that says, no, you can't do that. So he's trying to get it there. In the end, there's all kinds of prosecutions and hearings and things like that. But nobody's ever found guilty. I mean, there are some people that are found guilty, but their convictions all get overturned. In the end, there's nobody convicted for anything in any of this. It really at the heart of it was the Democrats trying to get at Reagan, somehow impeach him, get him thrown out of office, undermine his credibility with the American people. It was a political thing for them more than anything with world affairs. So.
Is this where he got the term Teflon president from?
I've not heard that with him. I've heard Bill Clinton called the Teflon president.
Reagan was called the Teflon president because nothing that ever bad happened just turned around.
I don't know. It would fit. It would fit. So, all right, let me give you a little bit about how this thing worked out. What Reagan did is he arranged for some weapons to be sold to Iran, and part of the money being exchanged in that process, the profit and some of that, went to the Contras in Nicaragua and El Salvador. Okay, so he's selling weapons to Iran, and the profits, and there's large amounts of money circulating. He's able to take some of that and get it to the Contras and funnel them. Now, at this point, Iran is still a communist nation, but it's not what it is today. Right? There was at least a relatively friendly Muslim dictator in charge there, friendly to us. Right? All right, so it's not like we're selling money to the Iran, or selling rockets and things to the Iran of today. Again, it was not necessarily a safe place to go. We wouldn't want to live there. But that was the system he set up, trying to get money to these people in there. So anyway, this thing blows up. There's hostages that are held in Lebanon, and in the middle of these negotiations, Reagan tries to use the negotiations and this money to negotiate and get the hostages freed. So there's accusations of him trying to pay off the terrorists to get our hostages released. And anyway, just all kinds of ugliness blows up out of this thing for multiple years. Eventually, like I said, people are brought before Congress in some hearings, some people are found guilty, and then the convictions are overturned. In the end, nothing happens officially. But Reagan really is damaged by this thing. It puts this cloud over the last couple of years of his presidency, this whole scandal. Teflon president, I don't know, I'm thinking think of all the scandals that you read about. Did you read about Clinton? What a wicked pig. Think about all those scandals. And, he's this good guy, but Reagan was this dirty dog. Let me give you a couple of names of some people that you might recognize that were involved. Oliver North. Anybody know that name? Okay. He runs, does he still have his program, War Stories? Okay.
I know he's been to Fort Hood a couple times while I was there.
Yeah, he's.
Covers Iraq and Afghanistan.
I've seen it every now and then on news reports. So, I haven't seen all of the hearings, but he was brought before Congress to testify and talk about a banana republic, kangaroo court or something. He had a lawyer, and him and his lawyer beforehand had talked about things and trying to figure out how they're going to answer all these questions. And a couple times he turns to address his lawyer and have a private conversation before he answers a certain question. Because, this Democratic panel is trying to find him guilty of something. This isn't just, tell us what happened. They were looking for a misstatement or anything. And the head of the panel starts to say, hey, what are you guys talking about? We want to know. Tell us, what's in that notebook you've got down there? He said, wait, this is my lawyer. I have to turn that over. And he said, no, this isn't a court. Give us that. They weren't forced to, but they were trying to force him to give to the committee the private notes that him and his lawyer had made. Another time, they brought in a receipt from a women's accessory store, earrings, and it was a receipt for some sort of hosiery item. And they were accusing him of having an affair. And so, how do you explain this receipt for this item? And he looks back and he says, well, it was leotards I bought from my daughter. That's what the receipt was for. So it was just extremely slimy and nasty and underhand. The Democrats being what they normally are, it's more of a political witch hunt. Again, like I said, it's a little bit seedy how Reagan had to get this done. But remember, it was it was the Democrats in Congress that put him in a position to try to find some way to get money to the Contras without just giving it to them. They said, you cannot do that. It is illegal. So, all right, and again, all these people are not found guilty. I should give you Oliver North, another guy. His name is John Poindexter. He was the National Security Counsel for the president. Both of those guys are found guilty, and then their convictions are overturned. The only two that are found guilty, and both of them are overturned. So in the end, there's no convictions that stick in this thing. So, but again, it did, in a sense, do what the Democrats wanted. It clouded the end of his presidency, and it consumed a lot of his energy and efforts at the end trying to handle this thing because they were so aggressive with it. All right, Iran-Contra affair. Any questions there? Any questions on Reagan? I think you'll enjoy the film that we watch. Sorry, it's a documentary.
Do you think the Soviet Union would have fallen earlier if this whole thing hadn't blown up and Reagan would have been able to focus on it more? Or was it too...
Possibly, and it's hard to say. I think it would have blown up a whole lot sooner if we had been so stupid for the last 30 years, but who knows, it might have, but it's a good question. All right, the last thing, or at least the next thing, won't be the last thing, we'll talk about the war on terror and talk about what happened prior to 9/11 and then look at the Bush Doctrine following that. So, all right. You're dismissed.